I'm going to live in this high-rise apartment with my mom. I want a divorce. I couldn't hide my confusion at the sudden statement my husband made. It seems like my husband was planning to live in the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father with his mother after our divorce. I wonder what he's thinking. I have had my share of frustrations regarding my husband ever since our marriage. Yet, I never considered divorce because there were aspects of him I respected. However, I never dreamt he would suggest starting a life with his mother in the home I inherited. As I stood dumbfounded, my husband, with a condescending smile, said, "I'll divorce you and just take this property." I must be really lucky. Seriously. The moment I saw his unpleasant smile, my love for him completely vanished. My name is Stacy. I'm a 28-year-old office worker. I managed to join the company I've long admired as a new graduate and have been vigorously working ever since. People often say, "You're a typical career woman." Being devoted to my job, I had never experienced a serious relationship, and neither was I particularly keen on marriage, thinking that living alone wasn't such a bad idea. Yet, a turning point in my life came. One day, my father called me with an unexpected proposition. "Stacy, you're 28 now. How about trying matchmaking?" I received an offer from someone I owe a favor to. "What, matchmaking? I think I'll pass. I still want to work." I was surprised and declined immediately as I had never considered matchmaking. "Don't say that. Why not try meeting him just once? If you find a nice partner, I'll also be able to rest assured. I want to see you as a bride." How can I refuse if you put it like that? Fine. I'll meet him. My father had been unwell for several months and was currently being cared for by my mother at home. His health hasn't been great recently. Knowing his condition, I couldn't ignore my father's wish to see me as a bride, so I was left with no choice but to accept to meet up with the guy he wanted to match me with. "That's great, Stacy. Thank you. I hope you get along well with him." Yes, I'd be happy if he's passionate about his work. The day of the meetup arrived. The man, Ted, was 27 years old, a year younger than me. He loved his job so much that he never got to stay in a long-lasting relationship because he was so busy. Seems like we're a pretty good match. I've also prioritized work over everything else so far. Really? We might get along well then. Ted smiled kindly. We hit it off quickly, and before we knew it, we were married. Our parents were very happy, and we were blessed by many as we started our newlywed life in a rented apartment. Later, my parents bought a high-rise apartment nearby and moved in. It was challenging for them to live in the countryside. Having my parents close by was better for frequent visits and immediate support, so I was pleased they decided to move into the high-rise apartment. 2 years had passed instead, and I got married. Our marriage, which started off smoothly, gradually began to face troubles. The issue was Ted's growing fondness for his mother, frequently inviting her over without discussing it with me. I wanted to spend quiet weekends after a busy week, but Ted started inviting his mother over without consulting me. His mother lived about a 10-minute drive from our place, and she had been living alone ever since my father-in-law passed away 5 years ago. While he initially didn't invite his mother frequently, he recently started to invite her over every week. "Oh, right. My mom is coming over today." When Ted casually mentioned it, I couldn't hold back any longer. "What, again?" "But she was here last week and the week before. I wish we could spend some time alone occasionally." "What are you saying?" "Since my dad's passing, she's been feeling lonely." "What's wrong with inviting her over once a week?" Ted yelled, furious at my suggestion. I might have accepted the weekly visits if his mother were kinder, but every time she would come over, she would take groceries and household items without even asking. Even when I protested, "It bothers me when you take things without permission," she would respond, "Don't be so stingy. You're working, no?" and dismissed my concerns. Furthermore, she criticized every little thing, from a speck of dust in the corner to the seasoning of my cooking, and would always be critical of how I managed household chores. What was worse was, she did these things out of Ted's sight, which made the problem even more serious. Ted thought of his mother as someone who, despite her sad fate of losing her spouse, lived a modest life alone. Ted, I've told you before, but your mother takes groceries without asking and always finds something to criticize about how I manage the household. It's frustrating, I said. You're lying again. My mom would never do such a thing. Stop belittling her. Ted shouted back, clearly angry. No matter how much I explained, Ted refused to listen. He loved his mother dearly and trusted her completely. Because of this ongoing situation, my affection for Ted had gradually faded. However, aside from the issue with his mother, Ted was rational. He was dedicated and diligent in his work, respected by his colleagues and subordinates, and often received calls for work-related consultations. I, too, am someone who dedicates herself to her work, so I appreciated Ted's work ethic. Although his company wasn't very large and his salary wasn't high, he worked hard and earnestly there. This respect for him prevented me from considering divorce at that time. But around the same time, my father, who had been dealing with health issues for a long time, passed away. He left this world quietly, as if he just fell asleep. After the funeral and when things had settled down, my mother decided to use the inheritance to move to a quiet apartment in the suburbs. And so, I inherited the high-rise apartment. The high-rise apartment was more conveniently located near the station than our current one. That evening, I proposed to Ted that we move there. I've inherited the high-rise apartment where my parents used to live. My mom has decided to move to a different one in the suburbs. How about we move to the high-rise one? Of course, it will be after my mom moves out. Upon hearing my suggestion, Ted's face lit up and he exclaimed, "Lucky," and started to celebrate. He then took out his phone and made a call. "Hello, Mom. I have some great news." He seemed to be talking to his mother, telling her that I had inherited my father's high-rise apartment. After ending the call, Ted turned to me with a smug smile and made a demand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Give me the keys." "What?" I was taken aback and reflexively asked him to clarify. "I mean the keys to the high-rise apartment. I want to go check it out. I know the place and have visited before, but I haven't thoroughly checked it out apart from the living room. I'll just go and see." "What are you planning?" "My mom is still there. What if you disturb her by suddenly showing up? Besides, it's already late." I felt an ominous premonition about Ted's high spirits. "Oh, right. Your mom is still there. Let's at least look at it from the outside then." I didn't understand his urgency, but Ted couldn't wait and I ended up accompanying him. The high-rise apartment was about a 15-minute walk from our current one. On the way there, the uneasiness I was feeling didn't subside. The reason for my uneasiness was Ted's unusually excited demeanor since learning I inherited the high-rise apartment, which seemed somewhat creepy. His eyes seemed to glow with ambition. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Standing in front of the high-rise apartment and looking up at the 40-story building, Ted exclaimed in amazement. "Wow, looking at it again, it's really big. Living here would be." And all of a sudden, he made an unbelievable statement. "I'm going to live in this high-rise apartment with my mom. I want a divorce." I couldn't hide my confusion at the sudden statement my husband made. I had a feeling that Ted was eyeing the high-rise apartment, but I never expected him to bring up divorce. It seems like my husband was planning to live in the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father with his mother after our divorce. I wonder what he's thinking. I have had my share of frustrations regarding my husband ever since our marriage. Yet, I never considered divorce because there were aspects of him I respected. However, I never dreamt he would suggest starting a life with his mother in the home I inherited. As I stood dumbfounded, my husband, with a condescending smile, said, "I'll divorce you and just take this property." I must be really lucky. Seriously. The moment I saw his unpleasant smile, my love for him completely vanished. I was taken aback by his statement but responded calmly, "Ted, it seems you might be misunderstanding something, but inheritance doesn't automatically go to the spouse." What are you talking about?" Ted laughed as if he didn't understand my words at all. I mean, this high-rise apartment is something I inherited, so it can't become yours. Inheritance laws don't apply to shared property. Even when I explained again, Ted said, "That's a joke. I won't believe such a lie." Okay, I was just perplexed. I didn't think he would be such a difficult person to talk to. It's funny to see you trying so hard to avoid divorce. Do you love me that much? How pathetic, he mocked. Ted's derisive laughter was extremely unpleasant. And at that moment, I realized my feelings for Ted had vanished. There used to be a respectable side to him, but now I only felt discomfort. If you don't agree to divorce, I'll file for arbitration. I'll live happily in this high-rise apartment with my mom, Ted said with a smirk, and I responded calmly. I'll agree to the divorce. When we get home, let's write the divorce papers. Nice. Surprisingly obedient, aren't you? He answered satisfied, and when we got home, we downloaded and printed the divorce papers from the City Hall's website. Ted signed the divorce papers first, and then I signed. I've completed my part. When I handed over the divorce papers, Ted eagerly took them and said, "I'll hand these in right away," and headed to the City Hall. Thus, our brief 2-year marriage came to an end. However, I couldn't move to the new residence immediately and had to continue living with him in our current place for a while. During this time, I consulted with a lawyer about dividing the property while also preparing to move. My plan was to move to the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father. During this period, my mother-in-law suddenly visited our home. Ted wasn't home, and I had to deal with her alone. When I opened the door, she started shouting, "Why haven't you given us the apartment yet, Stacy? Hand it over to us, quickly." As I've explained to Ted several times, that house is something I inherited from my father and I can't give it to you or Ted, I responded calmly. The audacious mother-in-law then said, "Don't be so stingy. You earn a lot, right? You're so busy with work that you neglect household chores, so you must not be struggling with money. It wouldn't hurt if you gave us the property." I firmly refused her demand. "There's no way I'll give you the apartment," and closed the front door. Behind the door, she yelled, "Why are you so insolent?" Ted was right to get a divorce from such a daughter-in-law. Hand over the high-rise apartment quickly. But after a while, she quieted down and seemed to have given up and left. That evening, when Ted returned home, I told him about his mother's visit. "Today, your mother came. Seems like she's expecting to live in the high-rise apartment. She hurled insults at me, and I can't take it anymore." Then Ted, as if thinking his mother had been insulted, suddenly began yelling hysterically. "What's with that attitude? My mom just wants to live in the high-rise apartment with me as soon as possible. You're the problem for not handing it over. My mom isn't at fault. Stop being stubborn and give us the property now." It's not about being stubborn. It's legally established that inheritance doesn't become shared property. It's exempt from property division. Do I need to explain it again? Even as I tried to explain, Ted wouldn't listen. I eventually successfully completed the property division process, but it took extra time and money because Ted made a fuss about not getting the high-rise apartment. Therefore, I decided to bill all the divorce expenses to him. After my mother moved to the suburban apartment, I decided to relocate to the high-rise apartment. I completed the move without Ted knowing. After moving to my new home, I changed all my contact information, cutting off all ties with him. I was worried for a while that he might come over, but fortunately, there were no signs of him coming, and months had passed. I was relieved, thinking he had accepted the reality that he couldn't live here. However, something unexpected happened. On a holiday, while I was relaxing at home, the bell suddenly rang. At that moment, I murmured to myself, "Has he finally come?" When I looked at the intercom monitor, there he was, as expected. I considered ignoring him for a while, but he persistently rang the bell, and thinking of the neighbors, I reluctantly went to the door. When I opened it, Ted was furious and shouted, "Why did you change your phone number? You've changed your email address too, right? Why didn't you tell me your new contact information? Why should I? I have no obligation to explain to you." The divorce was completed and we're no longer husband and wife, and the property division is settled, so we have nothing to do with each other anymore. Don't say nonsensical things. As I responded calmly, Ted became even more enraged. Don't make lame excuses. I'm really angry. That's clearly not a lame excuse. Having a reasonable conversation with him was impossible and it gave me a headache. Ted continued to shout as if he was about to pounce me. Why can't I have this property? Because of that, I've been laughed at by my friends. It's all your fault. Laughed at by your friends? What do you mean? When I asked, Ted was silent for a while before starting to speak slowly. Seems like he had bragged to his friends about having bought a high-rise apartment when we filed for divorce and I inherited this property. Envied by his friends, Ted didn't want to hear anything about how the property division didn't allow him to get the apartment and mistakenly thought that if he kept fighting, he would eventually obtain it. Even so, I've been scorned and ridiculed by my friends as a braggart for not living in the high-rise apartment, and my mother is pressuring me about when we can move in. You're responsible for this situation. Hearing Ted's complaints, I was just astonished and lost for words. Essentially, he was blaming me for his own frustrations. I was beginning to feel foolish to continue further discussions with him, and said, "It's not my fault. I've tried to explain to you many times that the high-rise apartment is not included in the property division. There's nothing more to talk about. Please leave," and tried to close the door. However, Ted wedged his foot in the door, preventing me from closing it. "Move your foot." "Shut up. I won't leave until you say you'll hand over the high-rise apartment. You're making me look like an idiot." Ted glared at me with bloodshot eyes. "If you won't leave, I'll call the police." "Hoot, call them. Don't think such threats will make me back down. I must get this property at any cost." While Ted dismissed the threat, I calmly took out my cell phone from my pocket. "Wait, are you seriously calling the police?" Ignoring Ted's nervous whisper, I completed the call to the police. Ted turned pale and shouted, "I didn't think you'd actually call the police. Are you crazy?" And quickly left the scene. In the following days, life returned to normal, and it seemed the shock of being reported to the police made Ted avoid contacting me. However, 3 months later, I found an envelope in my home's mailbox. It had no addressee, suggesting someone had delivered it directly. Who could this be from? I muttered to myself as I turned the envelope over to find Ted's name written on it. Shocked, I cautiously opened the envelope, wary of any dangerous contents. Inside were 3 letters, written in Ted's handwriting, detailing his recent circumstances. The letter began as follows. To Stacy, since I can no longer reach you, I am honestly sharing my current situation through this letter. Please read it to the end. With a mix of curiosity and annoyance, I began to read the letter. As I read on, it became clear that soon after our divorce, Ted had found a new lover and planned to live with her and his mother in this high-rise apartment. However, when it became apparent that Ted could not secure this place, the lover, who was merely attracted by the allure of the apartment, left him. Moreover, Ted had given her expensive gifts, which made him go into a significant amount of debt. He had also talked about purchasing the high-rise apartment at work, leading to unbearable cold stares from colleagues, ultimately causing him to resign. It appeared that his mother, who had been counting on living in the high-rise apartment, had been spending extravagantly and was now facing tough times without the expected support from Ted. The letter concluded with I have laid everything out honestly. So, please, I'm begging you, could you lend me some money? Just $10,000 would be enough. If you wish, we could even consider starting over. I had no intention of replying or reconsidering our relationship. Ted's assertive demeanor throughout the letter only elicited a sigh from me. It seemed that Ted was in a dire situation and had reached out to me for financial aid. I tossed the letter into the trash and immediately headed to the real estate agent. Given the possibility of Ted showing up at my current place and not wanting to receive such bewildering letters again, I decided to sell it, although it was a place I had inherited from my father, making me feel somewhat guilty. I believed my father would forgive me if it were for my happiness. My mother also agreed with my decision. I then proceeded to purchase another high-rise apartment, one with an even better location, which admittedly was quite expensive. However, thanks to my hard work and savings, I didn't hesitate to splurge on it. Of course, I didn't share my new address with Ted, so now I was finally able to live with peace of mind. I resolved to focus on my work again, renewing my commitment to my career.